The knock wasn't the kind you make when you miss your father. It was the kind you make when your credit card stops working. 3 sharp hits against my door. A pause. Then louder. Dad. Open up. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I folded the letter in my hand and placed it back into the envelope. 10 names written in my own handwriting. Through the window, I could see them gathering in my driveway. One by one. Cars I had helped pay for. Insurance policies I had co-signed. Businesses I had rescued. They didn't come on Christmas. They didn't come on my birthday. But they came today. Because something had changed. Because the money had stopped. When I finally opened the door, my oldest didn't hug me. He said, "Why are our accounts frozen?" I stepped aside and let them see the dining table. 10 envelopes. And I said quietly, "Before you ask about inheritance, tell me why I had dinner alone last week." And that's when the silence turned into truth. I didn't raise 10 children to depend on me. But somewhere along the way, they did. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 72 years old. I built a mid-sized construction company in Michigan from nothing but calloused hands and stubborn pride. I buried my wife 12 years ago. After that, I kept working not because I needed the money, but because I didn't know how to stop being useful. Usefulness became my identity. If a roof leaked, I paid. If a business failed, I invested. If a grandchild needed tuition, I signed. They called it generosity. I called it love. But love without boundaries becomes expectation. And expectation turns into entitlement quietly. The shift didn't happen overnight. It happened in small ways. Missed calls. Rescheduled dinners. "Sorry, Dad. Busy week." Busy. Funny how I was never too busy for them. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt slowly replaced in your own family, tell me where you're listening from. Because what happened next wasn't explosive. It was quiet. And quiet changes last longer. The last straw wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday. I had made reservations at a small Italian restaurant downtown, the one your mother loved. I told the kids a week in advance. Nothing fancy, just dinner. All 10 of them. "Let's make it a family night," I had said. They all said yes. By 6:15, I was the only one at the table. By 6:40, the waiter stopped refilling my water out of pity. At 7:02, my phone finally buzzed. One text. "Sorry, Dad. Something came up." Then another. "Rain check?" By 7:30, I was chewing steak that tasted like cardboard. I paid the bill for 11 people, left a tip big enough to hide my embarrassment, and walked to my car alone. That's when something shifted. Not anger, not heartbreak. Recognition. I realized I had become background noise in my own family. Convenient, reliable, predictable, optional. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I replayed the past 10 years instead. The loans, the temporary help, the joint accounts, the business bailouts that were never paid back. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. If I stopped being useful, would they still show up? That question didn't hurt. It clarified. When I got home, I opened my safe. Not out of revenge, out of awareness. And that night, I made the first change. Quietly. The first change I made didn't involve lawyers. It involved silence. For 10 years, I had been the first one to call. Birthdays, anniversaries, random Tuesdays. That week I didn't. I didn't text reminders. I didn't check on business deals. I didn't ask about the grandkids' soccer games. And something interesting happened. Nothing. No one noticed. 3 days passed before my second son, Mark, called. "Hey, Dad. Quick question, can you transfer 20 grand? Just until Friday." "No. How are you?" "No, you still alive?" "Just numbers." I looked at the phone for a long time before answering. "Not this time," I said calmly. Silence. Then a laugh. "Come on, Dad, don't be like that." "Don't be like what?" "Independent?" I didn't argue. I didn't lecture. I just repeated, "No," and hung up. My heart was pounding harder than it had in years. Not because I felt guilty. Because I felt awake. If you've ever said no for the first time in a relationship that depended on your yes, you know that feeling. It's terrifying and freeing. That night, I pulled out a yellow legal pad and wrote down one sentence. "They don't visit me, they visit access." And that was the moment I knew this wasn't about money anymore. It was about identity. If this story is hitting close to home, let me know in the comments what state or country you're listening from. I read them. And if you believe family should mean more than transactions, consider subscribing. Stories like this are rare, and they're honest. Because what I did next, it wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Strategy doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks like paperwork. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with my financial advisor. Not because I was furious, because I was finished pretending. His office smelled like leather and old coffee. He smiled when I walked in. "Planning something big, Harold?" "Yes," I said. "Planning something honest." We went through everything. Joint checking accounts, investment portfolios, trust structures, properties under shared assumptions but not shared ownership. And that's when I saw it clearly. They had access. They did not have control. That difference mattered. "I want to restructure," I said calmly. He raised an eyebrow. "All of it?" "All of it. No anger, no speeches, just signatures. Access removed. Automatic transfers canceled. Secondary card holders revoked. Trust conditions rewritten. Not to punish, to rebalance." On the drive home, I didn't feel powerful. I felt steady. That's the difference between revenge and boundaries. Revenge is loud. Boundaries are quiet and permanent. That evening, I wrote 10 letters. Not emotional ones. Clear ones. Each started the same way. "I love you. That hasn't changed." And each ended the same way. But access is not the same as relationship. If you've ever had to choose between being liked and being respected, you know that crossroads. And if you're still here listening, hit subscribe. Because this next part, this is where they showed up. Not for dinner. Not for me. For the first time in years. Because something stopped working. The call started at 9:12 a.m., one after another. Missed call, missed call, missed call. By 9:20, my phone looked like an emergency hotline. I didn't answer. I poured coffee instead. At 9:27, my oldest son, Daniel, texted, "Dad, did you change something with the accounts? My card just declined in front of a client." Declined. That word carried more urgency than "I miss you" ever had. By 9:34, 3 more messages came in. "This has to be a bank error. Call me ASAP." This isn't funny. I stared at the screen and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Not over them. Over myself. I turned the phone face down. At 10:03, someone knocked. Hard. Then harder. Through the window, I saw 2 cars in my driveway. By 10:10, there were 5. By Fjorton, all 10. They didn't coordinate this when I invited them to dinner. But they coordinated this. Money has a powerful group chat. When I finally opened the door, no one hugged me. Daniel spoke first. "What did you do?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We're sorry about dinner." Just logistics. I stepped aside and let them see the dining table. 10 envelopes. Their names written in black ink. "If you're here about the accounts," I said calmly, "you should read what's inside." Silence filled the room like smoke. And for the first time in years, they were all listening. If you've ever watched people move fast when money moves, you know this feeling. Stay with me. Because what happened when they opened those envelopes? That's when the inheritance changed. Paper doesn't shake. People do. Daniel opened his envelope first. The others followed, tearing theirs like there was still something inside they could fix. Each letter was identical. Clear, direct, calm. "I love you. That hasn't changed. But beginning today, all shared financial access has been removed. If you want a relationship with me, it will no longer be funded." The room changed temperature. Mark laughed first. "This is dramatic, Dad." "It's overdue," I replied. Another son, Chris, looked up. "So what? You're punishing us?" "No," I said. "I'm separating support from love." That sentence hit harder than I expected. One of them tried a different angle. "You can't just cut us off without warning." I held his gaze. "You cut me off without noticing." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. They weren't angry because I hurt them. They were angry because I removed predictability. And predictability had been their safety net. If you've ever been someone's safety net, you know what happens when you fold it up. They fall into themselves. Daniel stepped forward. "So what's the plan? You're just going to sit on everything?" I walked to the head of the table and placed one more document down. The house deed. Signed. Reassigned. And that's when I said the sentence none of them were ready for. The inheritance you expected doesn't exist anymore. If you're still here, you're about to see who they really are when the future isn't guaranteed. And if stories about family, power, and boundaries matter to you, subscribe. We're just getting started. The room didn't explode. It tightened. Daniel picked up the deed first, scanning it like there had to be a loophole hidden between the lines. You sold the house? He asked. Not yet, I said calmly. But it's no longer part of what you think is waiting for you. Mark frowned. This is emotional, Dad. You're overreacting. No, I said. I'm reallocating. That word bothered them more than anger would have. Reallocating meant I had thought this through. Chris stepped forward. So where is it going? I looked around the table at 10 grown men who suddenly looked like boys who had lost Wi-Fi. It's already moving, I said. Silence again. Not because they were listening, because they were calculating. That's when I saw it clearly. They weren't scared of losing me. They were scared of losing security. One of the younger ones finally spoke. So what did you do with it? I folded my hands. I created a foundation. That landed harder than anything else I'd said. A what? Daniel snapped. A scholarship fund. In your mother's name. No one interrupted after that. The air shifted. Not because of the money. Because the legacy had changed direction. If you've ever redirected something people thought was theirs, you know how loud silence can be. And what happened next proved something I needed to see. Who they were without guarantees. For a moment, none of them spoke. A foundation. Not a trust. Not a split. Not percentages. A foundation. In Mom's name? Mark asked quietly. Yes. I watched their faces carefully. I wasn't looking for outrage anymore. I was looking for recognition. You used what was supposed to be ours, Daniel said. I didn't raise my voice. It was never yours. That sentence cut deeper than I intended. Because it wasn't cruel. It was true. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway filled with their cars. Cars I had helped finance at one point or another. You expected the house, I continued. You expected the investments. You expected the accounts to be there one day. Chris crossed his arms. That's how inheritance works. No, I said softly. That's how assumption works. Silence again. Then, one of the younger boys, Michael, asked the only honest question in the room. So, what happens to us? That was the moment. The moment I'd been waiting for. Not, what happens to the money? What happens to us? I turned back toward them. That depends, I said, on whether you wanted me or what I provided. If you're listening and that question hit something in you, pause for a second. Ask yourself the same thing. Because what one of them did next changed everything. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't the loudest or the most successful. It was Andrew, my 8th son, the quiet one, the one who usually stayed out of financial conversations. He didn't step forward. He didn't argue. He pulled out a chair and sat down. Dad, he said carefully, is this about dinner? The room shifted, because someone had finally said it. I held his gaze. Yes, Daniel scoffed. We missed one dinner. Andrew didn't look at him. He kept looking at me. Not just dinner, he said slowly. We've been missing him. Silence. Real silence this time. Not strategic. Not defensive. Mark shook his head. So we're just supposed to lose everything because we were busy? I answered before Andrew could. You didn't lose anything, I said calmly. You lost an assumption. That difference matters. One is theft. The other is growth. Andrew leaned back slightly. So the foundation, what does it do? Trade school scholarships, I said, for kids who don't have someone to co-sign their future. That line hit harder than I expected, because they all knew I had co-signed theirs. For everything. If this is stirring something in you, stay with me. Because what Daniel said next almost made me change my mind. And that would have undone everything. Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood. You think we don't care about you? He said. You think this foundation fixes that? His voice wasn't angry. It was exposed. I think, I said evenly, that I made it too easy for you not to. That hit him. Not because it accused him. Because it was accurate. He ran a hand through his hair and paced once across the room. You've always handled everything, he said. You never complained. You never said you needed anything. I shouldn't have to compete with your calendars to exist, I replied. Silence again. But this silence wasn't sharp. It was uncomfortable in a different way. Andrew spoke softly. We got used to you being solid. I am solid, I said, but I'm not furniture. That one landed. One of the younger boys looked down at the envelope in his hands like it had just rewritten his childhood. Mark finally asked the question none of them wanted answered. So there's nothing left for us? I walked back to the table and placed both palms on the wood. There's something left, I said. They all looked up at once. Hope is loud when money is involved. I let the moment stretch. What's left, I continued, is the chance to show up before it's too late. No percentages, no payouts, just presence. If you've ever realized that someone doesn't owe you access just because they love you, you understand this shift. And if this story is making you think about your own family, don't just listen, quietly subscribe. These stories aren't about revenge. They're about reality. Because what happened over the next 3 months? That's when I found out which of my sons wanted an inheritance and which one wanted a father. The first week after that meeting was quiet, suspiciously quiet. No emergency calls, no quick transfers, no subtle reminders about upcoming payments. Just silence. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't buzzing with need. And I won't lie to you, the quiet hurt. Because when noise disappears, you find out whether it was love or dependence. 3 days later, Andrew showed up. Not with paperwork, not with questions. With coffee. He stood on the porch like he wasn't sure if he still belonged there. "I'm not here about the foundation," he said. I opened the door anyway. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where the envelopes had been. He didn't start with apologies. He started with honesty. "I didn't realize how much we leaned on you," he said. "Not just financially, emotionally. You were fixed, permanent. We treated you like you'd always be there." "I won't," I said quietly. That sentence changed the air between us. Because mortality hits differently when money isn't in the room. He looked around the house. "You really going to sell it?" "Yes." "Where will you go?" "Somewhere smaller," I said. "Somewhere I'm not a retirement plan." He nodded slowly. Then he said something none of the others had. "Dad, I miss you. Not the house. Not the accounts. Me." If you've ever waited years to hear 3 simple words from someone who assumed you were unbreakable, you know that feeling. And that was the moment I realized something important. Not all 10 of my sons came for money. Some of them just didn't know how to show up without it. But what Daniel did the following week, that nearly erased all of it. Daniel didn't come with coffee. He came with a lawyer. I found out when I received the email. Subject line: Request for competency evaluation. I read it twice before it registered. They were questioning whether I was mentally fit to restructure my estate. Not because I was confused. Because I had stopped funding them. I won't pretend that didn't sting. Not the legal maneuver. The implication. After decades of building, providing, stabilizing, the moment I drew a boundary, I was unstable. That night, I didn't call him. I didn't rage. I sat in the dark living room and replayed every bailout, every transfer, every "don't worry, Dad's got it." And I realized something uncomfortable. When you make yourself indispensable, people panic when you remove yourself. The next morning, I met with my attorney. He wasn't surprised. "It happens," he said. "When access disappears, people look for leverage." "Am I obligated to respond?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Only if you're unsure." I wasn't. So I did something Daniel didn't expect. I agreed. Full evaluation. Medical, cognitive, financial review. If they were going to question me, I would let the facts answer. And when the results came back, they didn't just confirm I was competent. They confirmed I was precise. If you've ever had your character questioned the moment you stood up for yourself, stay with me. Because when I shared those results with my sons, only one of them apologized. I didn't send the evaluation results with a speech. I sent them with one line. For the record, 10 attachments. Clear. Certified. Undeniable. The silence that followed felt different from the others. This one had weight. Andrew called first. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't know Daniel was going to do that." "I know," I replied. Because I did. Andrew had never been the loudest in the room. He wasn't now. Daniel didn't call that day. Or the next. Instead, I received a short message 2 nights later. "I thought you were being impulsive." That was it. No apology. No accountability. Just explanation. For years, I would have filled that gap myself. I would have said, "It's okay." I would have made it easier. This time, I didn't. Silence is powerful when you stop using it to protect other people's comfort. A week later, the family group chat came alive again. But this time, it wasn't about transfers or investments. It was about the foundation. How much is in it? Is it permanent? Can it be amended? Not, "How are you?" Not, "Can we visit?" Still math. Still structure. Still assumption. If you've ever realized someone is negotiating with your boundaries instead of respecting them, you know this moment. And that's when I made the final decision about the house. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I didn't announce that I was selling the house. I listed it, quietly. The realtor walked through on a Thursday morning, heels clicking against floors that had held every Christmas morning, every graduation party, every argument and reconciliation. "This place will move fast," she said. Of course it would. It wasn't just a house. It was stability. And stability is attractive. When the listing went live, I didn't send a link. I didn't warn them. By Sunday afternoon, it was under contract. That's when Daniel called. "Tell me that's not real." "It's real," I said. "You're selling our childhood." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm selling my maintenance." Silence. Then frustration. "You're doing this because you're hurt. I'm doing this because I'm finished funding nostalgia." That one hit him. Because nostalgia had been free for them. Expensive for me. Andrew called later that night. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes." "Where will you go?" "Somewhere smaller," I said. "Somewhere I'm not the foundation." There was a pause. Then he said quietly, "Dad, I don't want you to disappear." "I won't," I told him. "But I won't be predictable anymore. If you've ever had to choose between being accessible and being respected, you know that line." And what happened the day the house officially sold? That's when the inheritance changed forever. The closing took less than an hour. 38 years in that house. 52 minutes at a polished conference table. I signed where they told me to sign, initialed where they placed the tabs. When it was done, the realtor slid the final document across the table. "It's official," she said. Official. Such a small word for something that big. I walked out of that office lighter than I expected. Not happy, just unburdened. By the time I got home, the messages were already waiting. "Is it true?" "Dad, call me. You can't just do this without talking to us." Without talking to them? For years, I had talked. They just hadn't listened. That evening, all 10 of them showed up again. No yelling this time. No accusations. Just confusion. Daniel spoke first. "So that's it? The house is gone?" "Yes." "And the foundation?" "Funded." Mark ran a hand over his face. "What's left for us?" I looked around the empty living room. "There's still a father," I said. "If that's what you're asking." Silence. Real silence. For the first time, no one mentioned numbers. No one mentioned percentages. They were calculating something else now. Time. If you're still here, let me ask you something. When was the last time someone valued you without needing something? Because what happened next proved who was willing to learn, and who was only willing to lose. They didn't all leave at once. That surprised me. Usually, when there was nothing left to gain, they scattered. But this time, no one rushed to the door. Andrew stayed seated. Mark leaned against the wall, quiet. Even Daniel didn't argue. It was the youngest, Tyler, who finally spoke. "What do we do now?" "Not about the money. Not about the foundation. Just now." I took a slow breath. "You live," I said, "without assuming I'm your safety net." "That's not what I meant," he replied. "I know," I said gently. "But that's where it starts." For years, I had stepped in before consequences ever reached them. Business risks felt lighter because I was behind them. Loans felt safer because I co-signed. Decisions felt reversible because Dad would fix it. When you remove that cushion, people either grow or blame. Daniel finally looked at me, not defensive this time. "What if we mess up?" "You will," I said. "So did I." "But no one rescued you," Andrew added quietly. "Exactly." Silence again. But this silence wasn't hostile. It was processing. I looked around at 10 men I had raised to be strong and realized I had accidentally raised them to expect protection instead of partnership. "If you want something from me now," I said, "it's not money, it's effort." And that's when something shifted in the room. Not fear. Responsibility. If you've ever stepped back so someone else could finally step forward, you know how hard that is. And if you're still listening, subscribe. Because what happened over the next 6 months proved whether this was a lesson or just a temporary inconvenience. The first month was the hardest. Not for them. For me. Because stepping back doesn't just remove control, it removes noise. And when the noise fades, you're left alone with yourself. No emergency transfers. No, "Dad, can you just quiet mornings and long evenings." I moved into a smaller place across town. 2 bedrooms. No grand staircase. No formal dining room waiting for guests who never came. Andrew visited first. Not to inspect. Not to calculate. He brought groceries. Figured you shouldn't stock the fridge alone, he said. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady. Daniel didn't come for 5 weeks. But when he did, he didn't come empty-handed. He brought documents. Not legal ones. Business plans. I refinanced, he said. On my own. I didn't praise him. I nodded. Good. Mark sent me a message one night. Paid off the short-term loan. Took longer without you. No request attached. Just information. And that's when I understood something important. They weren't collapsing without my money. They were recalibrating without my cushion. And that's growth. Not loud. Not cinematic. Just real. If this part feels slower, it's because real change always is. And if you're still here, that tells me something about you, too. Because what happened at Thanksgiving? That was the real inheritance. Thanksgiving came quieter than usual. No formal invitations. No expensive reservations. Just a simple text I sent to all 10 of them. Dinner. 4 p.m., my place. No agenda. No mention of the foundation. No mention of inheritance. Just dinner. At 3:47, Andrew knocked. Not aggressively. Not urgently. Just a normal knock. He brought pie. At 3:58, Tyler arrived. Then Mark. Then 2 more. By 4:12, 8 of my 10 sons were sitting in my Smino living room. No one asked about money. No one mentioned the house. Daniel walked in last. He didn't say much. He just hugged me. Not long, but real. We ate at a table too small for all of us. Plates balanced. Elbows touching. No one checked their phone. At one point, Tyler looked around and laughed. Kind of nice not knowing what we're getting one day. Mark added, kind of forces you to just be here. Exactly. That was the inheritance. Uncertainty. Responsibility. Presence. If you're listening and you've ever realized security can accidentally replace connection, think about that tonight. Because when dinner ended, something happened I hadn't planned for, and it changed how I saw all of them. Dinner ended the way good dinners should. Slowly. No one rushed to leave. No one checked their watch. Plates were stacked without being asked. Andrew carried dishes into the kitchen. Tyler wiped the table. Mark took out the trash. Small things. But I noticed, because for years, I had done all of that while they debated investments in the next room. As the evening thinned out, Daniel lingered. He stood near the window, looking out into the dark. I was wrong, he said finally. Not defensive, not strategic, just tired. I thought you were pulling away from us, he continued. But you were pulling away from the money. I nodded. I didn't want to compete with what I provided, I said. He swallowed. I didn't realize how much I measured you by stability. That one hurt, but not in the old way. It hurt like healing does. Before he left, he said something I hadn't heard in a long time. Call me this week, not for anything, just call. And I will. Because inheritance isn't what you leave when you die. It's what changes while you're still here. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you. Stories like this aren't about cutting people off. They're about choosing yourself before it's too late. And if this reminded you of someone you need to call, don't wait. Because what I realized that night, the foundation wasn't the inheritance. The boundary was. Winter came again, but it didn't feel the same. Not because everything was perfect, because everything was honest. A year ago, Christmas meant expectation. This year, it meant choice. I didn't send reminders. I didn't plan a grand meal. I made one dish. Simple. Enough for whoever showed up. At 2 p.m., there was a knock. Not pounding, not urgent, just steady. Andrew stood there first. Then Daniel. Then the others, not all at once. Not coordinated like a financial emergency. Just arriving. No one asked about the foundation. No one asked about the house. Tyler handed me a small box. Inside was a framed photo from Thanksgiving. All of us squeezed around that small table. No tension. No negotiation. Just presence. Daniel cleared his throat. We didn't come for anything, he said. I know, I replied. And I did. We ate. We talked. We disagreed about football. We argued about politics. But no one mentioned inheritance. Because inheritance had already been distributed. Not in money. In perspective. Before they left, Andrew lingered by the door. Dad, he said quietly. Thanks for not giving up on us. I shook my head. I didn't give up, I said. I just stopped paying for attention. That's the difference. If this story made you think about your own family, about where love ends and access begins, take a moment tonight. Call someone or set a boundary. Both are acts of love. And if you believe stories like this matter, the quiet ones, the honest ones, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance you leave your children is the one that forces them to grow, and sometimes the greatest inheritance you give yourself is finally being valued without being needed. End.